Have you ever wondered why amp sims just don't sound good enough on your guitar tracks? Amp sims like those made by Neural DSP are used in so many pop punk records by the biggest bands, and it sounds great for them, so it must be their equipment or their expensive guitars, right? Well, I actually don't think so, and hopefully I can prove it. Listen to this small excerpt where the mix has rhythm guitars tracked and recorded on a £250 guitar that still has its stock pickups. In this video, I will show my guitar tone building process to build great sounding tones using stock pickups, and hopefully prove that it isn't your guitar, pickups, or interface that is holding back your guitar sound in your mixes. These guitar tracks have been recorded directly into my USB interface, so no outboard gear was used whatsoever. So let's hear the DI by itself. Cool, so it's a good, decent sounding DI, and if you've worked on as many different guitar DI tracks as I have, you'll kind of hear that it's lacking a bit of magic and it lacks a little bit of like presence and energy than what you get from like really decent pickups like EMGs, Seymour Duncans, that kind of thing. It sort of sounds rounder and softer. These are also passive pickups, and I usually choose active ones because I just like that bit of bite. For comparison, let me play you DI tracks for the same part that are tracked on EMG 83 and 81s with my LTD Evertune, which I love, which sounds like this. So this is what we're working with, just so we'll go back to the stock pickups just quickly. See, it's a warmer sound, it's a rounder sound, and we're doing punk, right? So we have to just work a little bit harder to get a bit of magic out of the amp. So I'll take you through how I always build my guitar tones with amp sims, and then all we'll really do is drive it a little bit harder. We might use a compressor on the DI, and we might just boost it in the 2K region with a 2K shelf, or maybe even an 8K shelf, just to get a bit more of that brightness out. We might pull out some of the low mids. So let's get started. And where this is recorded straight into an interface on stock pickups, I'm just going to use some saturation, sort of like you'd get from like a really good preamp. So I'm just going to use the Waves Sheps 73 and just drive it a little bit into this. So that is literally just a tiny bit of harmonic saturation. You probably aren't going to hear it there, but when the amp is in, if you were bypassing this or listening to it off and on, you'd hear just a little bit of like, I don't know, magic juice coming from it. Let me show you off and on. Can you sort of hear that? Just a little bit more excitement. And I have brought the output down to sort of level match it. So what you're hearing mostly is the excitement that's being added and less of just like a louder signal. So let's turn on my favorite amp sim ever, for this kind of music especially. And that is the Archetype Nolly, the older version, not the Nolly X. This is the original one before that. And if you haven't got the Nolly, or you've already bought the Nolly and you've got the X, and you want to get a similar tone to what I'm going to get today, you can go on their website and download a legacy version of it so you can get the older versions from before it became the X. So I'm going to switch it to stereo, and I should just point out quickly that what we're dealing with here is a stereo track. If you look at the waveform, this is actually a double tracked guitar part. So this bit on the top, that's one take, and then the double track is on the bottom here. And all I've done is I've just hard panned left and right and basically just bounced them down into one file. So I can run the amp in stereo and I haven't got to tweak two amps at once, because Logic doesn't really help you with that as well as Pro Tools does. That aside, cool. So Archetype, stereo, I'm going to unlink the cabs because I want to use the same cab that the 5150 head has, but I want to use this sort of JCM-ish head. So let's see what we got. Yeah, so it's a little crackly, like the distortion or the saturation. It doesn't sound as smooth as it does when it comes through like proper decent pickups with like an expensive sounding guitar. It's a little bit, I don't know, it sounds like a crackle to me more than like a nice smooth distortion. Yeah, I think we're getting a lot more low mids, and that's probably the reason, because they're sort of pushing into it more than the higher frequencies do, like the upper mids and stuff, like on an EMG 83 or something. But that's absolutely fine because we can work with that. I've got a sound in my head that I'm chasing. It'll be the sound that you heard at the beginning of the video in the intro, hopefully, as long as this goes right. So I'm going to flip the bright switch on here because this is basically just a shelf. It sounds good. Gain, I'm going to bring down a little bit just so I can make sure I'm getting the right type of gain. I don't want that like crackliness. I want more like a smooth distortion to it. Bass, I'm going to whack up because we'll deal with it in the next section when we get the plugins on there. And let's hear what we've got. Yeah, we're really starting to sound punky now, right? It's still good. It's still got that defined pick attack. It still sounds like it's got attitude, a bit of punkness to it. It's cool. One thing you don't want to do is overgain these guitars, especially if they're on stock pickups, because it doesn't really sound good. And then when you get it into the whole mix, it kind of, you lose its definition. For example, for me, when you've got vocals on top of that and lead guitars and stuff, it just becomes a bit of a, these guitars disappear. So I prefer to have like a crunchier tone, less like full-on distortion. That's got far more definition. And in fact, if we whack it up to 10, we get a little bit of more like distortion out of it, but it's mostly kind of sounds, the vibe is the same. Yeah, cool. It's pop punk at the end of the day. It's not metal. Right, so if you've watched any of my other guitar videos, the secret, I think, to pop punk rhythm guitars is the mid. And on this amp in particular, the mids sound great. So we're going to get a lot of mids in there. And then when you've got vocals and bass and everything, the guitars aren't going to disappear. I still hear a lot of pop punk mixes where the guitars are distorted, but they've just decided to fill the space with like the bass, because the guitars do sit back. If you've already got, overheads, vocals in the upper mid-range, top end, you've got bass, kick drum and stuff in the low end, the guitars, they need somewhere to sit, and that's the mid-range. Yeah, decent. Let's hear it in solo. Nice. Now, I think I'm going to try the overdrive pedal here, which is basically a tube screamer. And if you've ever recorded guitars in the studio, you've probably seen this trick where the drive is pretty much off, the tone's just nudged a little bit because it cleans up the low mids of the guitar. And with these stock pickups, our low mids are going to be pushing into everything more than the upper mids are, and it's going to make things sound a little rounder. And we kind of want it to be a little bit more bite and less like roundness for this kind of music. The trade-off with that, and I'm hearing it quite a lot here, is we're losing our pick attack. And I'm not sure I actually want that. Where we've got the saturation from the Shep 73, I think maybe we can leave this off. If I was to turn that off, I might prefer the tube screamer. Let's have a listen. Yeah, so our saturation from the Sheps is doing what the tube screamer does. And I actually think I prefer it where I can hear that pick attack. Gives it more definition. Yeah, if I just make sure I gain match this, just to see. Yeah, that clankiness, I like that. This is a preference thing. I think I'm going to go with the tube screamer off for now. I do, however, want to get the compressor in because I feel like what I'm used to hearing from like EMGs and my favorite guitar pickups is that bit of like snap. And funny enough, there's a snappy setting on this compressor here. But this just means that it's a slower attack, faster release, so it brings out the transient. Yeah, I like that. We're getting a bit more saturation when the compressor's in. Not necessarily from the compressor, but where it's compressing things. And I'm still getting that pick attack in there. That's nice. Now, there is something in my head now saying, well, maybe we can get the pick attack and the tube screamer in if we use the compressor. So let's give it a try. It's a far more even tone, but it still lacks that clankiness. I think I definitely prefer it with the tube screamer off. In fact, you can hear when the compressor is off, it sounds more like one of those low gain tones where from the pick attack part, the distortion is there. But in between it, so as it's sort of like decaying, in between the strums, it's losing that distortion. So I definitely think this compressor is super important. Yeah, cool. And just quickly, if you make music like this and you want me to mix your next song, then head over to my website, terrybeckleyrecording.com. Scroll to the bottom, fill out the contact form, let me know you're interested, and I will get back to you. The link is in the description. And if you wanted to see what was on the cab, we've gone for just the 5150 here on the edge of the inner cone, which is how the amp opens up, and it's also usually the first place you try if you were micing it up, I think, for this kind of sound. Adding in a 421 and stuff, it's going to give it some more like depth, but we want that. I sort of want that clanky SM57 punkness, you know. I don't want to round it out too much. Cool, so onto the EQ, and we're just going to clean some stuff up now. I'm going to use a Pro Q3. You know, these are just normal EQ moves. I might do a dynamic EQ, but it's just because I like to do that. You don't necessarily have to get the same kind of sound. So I'm just going to set my filters now, my low pass and high pass filters. Cool, and you can hear when those palm mutes happen, the tone changes, and I don't want that. It sort of gets a bit muddy, so we're going to deal with that also. But now to do the low pass, so we'll kill the super high end and make sure we're not getting just noise coming through. Cool. Now I can sort of hear it a bit cleaner, and I'm thinking, yeah, we're going to have to go and clean up some of those resonant frequencies. Yeah, that 2K spot, I always go look around there, 2K to 2.6K. I've set it to be dynamic because I almost feel like every pick attack, the 2K sort of jumps out more. Interestingly, if you have something that can EQ just the transient and leave the tail, I do have this other EQ here. So this is an extra step, and I'm not saying, I don't want this video to be about the expensive plugins that I'm using because I want you to be able to get these same sound from everything. But just as a side note and a cool tip, if you ever feel like you wanted to EQ something that was happening on the pick attack but not the sustain or vice versa, I picked up this JST EQ. And interestingly, this is like I don't know if you've heard of split EQ, where it basically can EQ the transient and sustain separately, and it was quite expensive. This does a really good job, sounds great, and has that feature in it. So I'll just quickly show you. I'll turn off my 2K cut from Pro Q3, and I can get it to just affect the transient with that 2K. So that's it there, and I'm going to just click this here. So you see that transient? It's only going to affect the transient. It's not going to affect the sustain because I only really hear that problem on the transient. Cool, so I'll drag it down so it's a cut, not a boost, and we'll go from there. Yeah, that's good. That's nice. So now I can deal with the ones that are just there. I can keep that bite, that 2K bite in the sustain, and I'm only losing it from the pick attack, which is where it's a problem. So now I can take out the resonant frequencies that are just constantly there. And you might be thinking, yeah, you're losing all this EQ and you're losing the bite, you're losing the presence. We're going to deal with that when we boost EQ in the next stage. And if you remember, we did a big mid-range boost on the amp. That was a nice wide boost. We're now going to cut out some mid-range frequency so that we get a nice clean mid-range boost without the sort of honkiness. Yeah, brilliant. So we've cleaned it up. We've made it sound more in focus, which is what I always say, and I guess that term is kind of hard to understand, but we haven't got to listen through all of the extra junk to hear the tone now. We can just hear the tone. And in solo, it might sound like we've lost, we're reducing it a little bit. We've lost a little bit of its life. But remember, this is slotting into a mix. We've got vocals that don't want to fight. We've got lead guitars that don't want to fight. We've got the top end of the bass that we don't want to fight. And we've done, a few more EQ cuts than I would have done on an EMG pickups or like a proper expensive guitar and stuff. But we're now going to bring back some bite and life with some boosting. Hopefully you can hear when I bypass the EQ and bring it back. All that we're really missing in the context of the full mix is some stuff that we don't really want to hear. Yeah, it's actually relaxing it a little bit. And now we're going to bring back some pleasing stuff. I might just, and again, this is just for my own benefit, I'm going to use a bit of soothe just to get rid of some extra bit of harshness. I do this on all my guitars, whether they're stock pickups or not. Again, this is an optional step, and I understand the soothe is expensive, so that's not really the point in this video. But I like to do it because I just like to make sure it's as smooth as possible before I start boosting. Yeah, cool. So now we're going to really open these guitars up with a couple of EQ boosts, or maybe just the one. I'm going to bring out my trusty SSL channel from Waves, which I love, and I'm going to start with an 8K shelf to give it some life. That the sort of like bite and the sort of top end presence that we're missing from it being stock pickups. Yeah, and what a difference does that make? You wouldn't have to necessarily go as hard, although sometimes I still do with the expensive stuff, but to me that sounds great. And you wouldn't even think, well, they're stock pickups. I don't think. Yeah, I like it. We've got some life back in it now. We've got a bit of that sort of like punky edge to it. I'm now going to use a compressor that I love on guitars, which is the Renaissance Axe from Waves, but it's just compression that brings guitars forward. You can use the stock ones from Logic. It's just the kind of sound you're after. And I feel like, yes, there's going to be a little bit of a volume boost, but it really does push your guitars forward. And I like a guitar forward mix personally. So let's dial this in. Yeah, brilliant. I mean, yes, there's a volume boost, but I don't know if you can sort of tell, it really does bring everything else forward with it. And it's just a little bit of extra, like 5% that you can give your guitars. And that's why I love that compressor. But again, it's compression in general. You just have to make sure you dial in your attack and release and your ratio to how you want it to sound, to achieve that effect. Okay, so now I'm thinking I want a bit of like saturation on it. I'm going to use my favorite saturation, but it's just going to be tape or tube saturation, depending on what I prefer. And it's so subtle that really you can get it from any saturation plugin. The free one's still good, Let's give it a listen. I just love how it seeps into the mix with this saturation. You know, it's so subtle, but I only really hear it in context. And it just seeps everything in. It's almost like, it's not glue, but it almost acts in a similar sort of way where it just spreads everything out sonically into the mix. So nothing's like poking out. Cool. I feel like we could get away with a bit more bite. I don't think it needs it necessarily, but it's worth having a listen to see if I like it. I'm going to go for a 2.5K shelf. I'm going to use the Mag EQ4 from Plugin Alliance. Well, it's the Brainworks one, of course, but it's just a 2.5K shelf. Yeah, I really like that. That sounds great. Cool. Last touch then. If you remember when I said those palm mutes come in, it just makes the tone sound a little muddy. And I don't want that. So I'm going to do the Andy Sneep trick. I'm sure you've seen it. It's just dynamic EQ or multi-band compression, whichever way you want to go about it. I use the C4 from Waves, but it's basically just setting a threshold for the sort of like 150 to 300 hertz area on guitars so that when those palm mutes happen, that area is going to jump up. So you're going to hit the threshold of the compressor and it's just going to bring it down and keep our tone from getting muddy when the palm mutes are in. I know it's the Andy Sneep trick because that's how everyone always used to talk about it back in the day. It was sort of like he pioneered it. I don't know if that's true. So I'm going to set it to be about 100. Let's go down to about 80 so make sure we get any woofiness too. So about 300-ish. Cool, so I'm going to set the threshold so it only really engages. It'll move a little bit, but it's only really going to engage when the palm mutes happen. If you see this little level we've got here, it did jump up on those palm mutes. I'm going to make the range a little more so that it does reduce it a little bit more once it engages. And we'll go from here. Yes, fantastic. And that's it. I think we've got a really decent sounding tone out of literally £250 worth of guitar. It was actually the first ever guitar that my parents bought me back in 2002, maybe. £250 it cost from London. Stock pickups. I restrung it for this video, but haven't touched anything else on it. And then we can compare that to the guitar tone that I did when I was actually messing around with this song a year ago. That was recorded through my LTD Evertune with EMG 81 and 83 pickups. So let's hear that, and then we'll go back to the stock pickups version. So this is the LTD Evertune. And this is our stock pickups one that we just did today. You know, I'm pretty pleased with that. You can still, you can hear when you compare that there's a smoother top end and a smoother upper mids to the LTD, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's better, which is punk we're talking about. To me, that still sounds like it's got all the life and the definition and it fits into the mix. And all we did really was a bit of extra compression on the DI before it hit the amp. We use an Ampsim that's used on all kinds of pop punk and top records, admittedly. But if you wanted to see how I would go about making a guitar tone for any Ampsim, then you can check out this video here. If you want to see more pop punk guitar videos or pop punk bass, drums, vocals videos, then head over to my channel. There's a ton of videos there, mixing pop punk emo. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.